The Transatlantic Slave Trade, one of humanity's greatest tragedies. Over 12 million Africans torn from their homes, their futures stolen, their identities erased. Yet, many of us barely know the full weight of its impact on Africa. Today, we're uncovering the deep, painful history of the transatlantic slave trade and how it changed Africa forever. This isn't just about the past. It's a story that still echoes through time. The roots of the slave trade. Before Europeans arrived on Africa's shores, Africa was a continent rich in culture, power, and kingdoms. From the Kingdom of Mali, known for its wealth, to the powerful Kingdom of Benin, Africa was thriving. But then came a new kind of greed. European powers arrived not just for gold or spices, but for something far darker, human lives. In the 15th century, Portuguese traders were among the first to begin capturing and buying slaves on Africa's western coast. What started as small-scale trading spiraled into a global enterprise that would span centuries and destroy millions of lives. This was the beginning of a massive network, one that would see entire communities ravaged by war and kidnapping, as African rulers themselves, in desperation or greed, contributed to the capture of their own people. Neighbor turned on neighbor. Kingdoms went to war, hunting human beings like animals, all to fuel the growing demand for slaves in the Americas. The Middle Passage, a journey of horror. But the cruelty didn't end with capture. No, it was just the beginning. Imagine being shackled in iron chains, ripped from your home and crammed onto a ship so crowded that you can barely breathe. The Middle Passage, the treacherous journey across the Atlantic, was nothing short of a death sentence for many. For months, these enslaved Africans endured unbearable conditions. Starvation, sickness, suffocation, disease spread like wildfire in the belly of these ships, and death was a constant companion. It's estimated that up to 2 million Africans died during the Middle Passage alone. Their bodies were thrown overboard, leaving a haunting legacy in the Atlantic Ocean. Slavery in the Americas, a new hell. Those who survived the Middle Passage faced an even harsher reality on the other side. Lives of brutal, forced labor. The plantations of the Caribbean, Brazil, and the American South were built on the backs of enslaved Africans. For them, there was no rest, no mercy, just endless toil, violence, and degradation. They were stripped of their names, their cultures, their identities, and forced to assimilate into a system that saw them as nothing more than property. Families were torn apart, sold like livestock, and subjected to unimaginable horrors. For the enslaved, life was a constant fight for survival, but their spirit remained unbroken. They found ways to resist, to preserve pieces of their culture, to rise up in rebellion, and to hold on to the hope of freedom. While millions of Africans were being enslaved and sent overseas, Africa itself was left devastated. The transatlantic slave trade didn't just take people, it shattered entire societies. Kingdoms that once thrived were now in constant warfare. The fabric of African society was ripped apart. The loss of so many young men and women, those who would have been the future leaders, workers and thinkers, crippled Africa's development. Communities struggled to rebuild, and the ripple effect of this violence and exploitation can still be seen in the political and economic struggles that plague parts of Africa today. But Africans did not submit to this fate without a fight. From the moment the first slave ships arrived, Africans resisted. Whether through revolts aboard ships, rebellions on plantations, or the preservation of their culture, Africans showed incredible resilience in the face of unimaginable cruelty. In Africa, powerful leaders like Queen Zinga of Ndongo stood up to the Portuguese. Others resisted in more subtle ways by holding on to their languages, their songs and their stories, passing them down to the next generation. These acts of defiance kept the flame of Africa's spirit alive, even in the darkest times. The transatlantic slave trade ended in the 19th century, but its impact is still felt today. The scars left by slavery are visible in Africa's economic struggles, its fractured societies, and the enduring racial inequalities across the globe. But despite this, Africa has shown incredible resilience. The descendants of those who were enslaved continue to build, to create, and to fight for justice and equality. The story of the transatlantic slave trade is not just one of horror, but also of strength, survival, and the unbreakable will of the African people. Today, it's our duty to remember the horrors of the transatlantic slave trade, not just as a dark chapter in history, but as a powerful reminder of the strength of the human spirit. Africa's story didn't end with slavery. It's a story of resilience, of rebuilding, and of never giving up. Africa's future is bright, and the world must acknowledge not just its painful past, but its incredible potential. Together, we can honor those who were lost by continuing to tell their stories, and by building a future that acknowledges the strength and resilience of Africa. Thank you for watching. If you want to dive deeper into Africa's rich history, hit that subscribe button, like the video, and share it with someone who needs to hear this story. Let's keep these stories alive, because history, no matter how painful, must never be forgotten.